All right, good morning, everyone. Chad Warmington here at the State Chamber. Want to thank you for being with us today. We're going to talk about data privacy legislation this morning, and we've witnessed data privacy legislation being enacted in many other states around the country, including California, Colorado, Nevada, and there's been some really troubling issues that have come out of those laws. So many other states are considering a state approach to data privacy legislation, and Oklahoma is on that same path right now. The difficult experience, excuse me, that those businesses are having trying to comply with these different state privacy laws are really ample evidence that a federal law is really the preferential route to take versus a state patchwork of really inconsistent laws. So before we get too far down the road in Oklahoma, we wanted to learn more about what is happening across the country and what Congress is doing to address the issue. And so we're fortunately going to be joined by two very knowledgeable people on this issue. Excuse me. Congressman Markwayne Mullin, who represents the 2nd District of Oklahoma. And Congressman Mullin has been serving in his 5th term and is also on the U.S. House Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the primary committee taking up this issue in Congress currently. Jordan Crenshaw is the Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Technology Engagement Center. And Jordan's really one of the preeminent experts on this issue. So we're going to turn it over to Jordan first to give us a quick dive on what data privacy is and why businesses should be concerned. Jordan, take it away.
Well, Chad, thank you for hosting today. I think, fundamentally speaking, data privacy really is about the issue of how businesses can use and also share and collect consumer data. And that's fundamentally where that issue is. In terms of what we're seeing across states, actually, I put together a map for all of you to distribute afterward, but it's got a map of basically all the different models that states are taking up throughout the country this year. What we've seen is actually, and there it is right there, you can see several models across the country. Those in blue are states that carried over legislation from last year that are still considering legislation. Those in yellow are those that have taken up new bills just this term over the last month. It's a total of 22 state bills that are comprehensive in nature across the country. And what we've seen is that there are various models that are emerging. There is California's consumer privacy model, which was the first state in the country to pass comprehensive privacy legislation. It's been 1,300 days, over 1,300 days since that law was signed into law without a federal bill. We've also seen other states pass legislation like Virginia, which we think are somewhat more reasonable in terms of striking the right balance between protecting privacy and also giving businesses fair warning. Colorado passed similar legislation that had things like global opt-out, which means that's the ability of a consumer to press a button essentially and require all the other websites interacting with that website to honor those privacy requests. And then we've seen other states like Florida adopt their own models. Others are trying to insert things like private rights of action into these bills, which could be incredibly detrimental to the business community, especially with data being so fundamental to business models. And one of the things I would strike is that a lot of these bills that we're seeing are targeted toward the tech industry, but at the same time, they actually all encompass everyone from small businesses to hotels, restaurants, retail. And because of that, it's a one size fits all approach is toward tech is not helpful necessarily for the entire ecosystem, and it's really impacting business models. The concern is that we're going to see a state patchwork emerge that's going to make it either difficult for companies to comply, stop using data in many ways. Specifically, it'll disproportionately impact small businesses who don't have the ability to comply. And actually, just recently, the ITIF group here in DC actually released a study that said if 50 states end up passing privacy laws, it could cost the economy $1 trillion, and 200 billion of that specifically for small businesses. So it's because of this confusing state patchwork, along with the potential for FTC rulemaking, which is coming down the pipe, that this could be a 50-car pileup of regulations. And because of that, we really need to ensure that we have one clear, uniform set of rules across the board, a national privacy bill that protects all Americans equally, that's easy for businesses to understand and comply with, that gives consumers robust, clear privacy protections, ensures innovation, and protects privacy. You might be on mute, Chad.
The beauty is that I've fallen out of practice in doing Zooms, so I forget that I'm on mute, and that's a good sign overall for our economy, right? That I can't do a Zoom anymore. I used to just be an absolute total pro at it, but I'm not. So Jordan, appreciate it. And we're gonna have time for questions at the end of the webinar. So now I'd like to ask Congressman Mullin to discuss kind of the feasibility of federal government taking the issue and kind of give us an update on what's going on in DC. Congressman?
Well, thank you so much, and I wish I was out of practice of doing Zooms, but I don't get to stay in Oklahoma too much. So in DC, we still do Zooms constantly. Look, data privacy is obviously incredible and an important need that we have to have. The problem is we can't have a patchwork from 50 different states. It just isn't feasible for small businesses to take care of that. When you start looking at large businesses, they have an amount of resources that they can do that. And I think what you would end up happening is you'd have your medium size to larger, smaller size companies. They'd have to consolidate and because that's the only way they could compete with the top tier individuals, Amazon, Walmart, areas like that. So if you have a patchwork of 50 different states doing this, you would have, even if it's a retailer in downtown Oklahoma City, they would have a difficult time because most retail now is done online. I mean, a tremendous amount of it. My wife, I don't even know the last time she went to a strip center other than to go in and buy makeup at some place she always go to, Altel or Alta or something like that. You guys probably know what it is. And other than that, everything's bought, everything but groceries is bought online. And so when that's happening, you without knowing, the business downtown could be breaking some state law because someone out of state is going to buy it. And then now they're not complying with that information that they have from that individual that's from Arkansas or Texas or Missouri or Rhode Island. So it's important that we have a federal standard moving forward. On energy and commerce, we do have a jurisdiction over this, and we are working on this. Unfortunately, and I'm not trying to play politics here, I'm just telling you what the status of it. Unfortunately, Democrats aren't even interested in this issue. Republicans, we've been leading this. We have been talking to them. We've been trying to get the committee to even pick it up. Chairman Plone hasn't showed any interest at all in doing this. Ranking Member Rogers has taken this personal, and she's actually leading the bill. She, as the ranker, which is rare, but she's leading the bill on data privacy from the federal standard. But it's going to take bipartisan support. Even if we went back the House next year, it is going to take bipartisan support because Biden still has to sign it. So whatever we do, we have to get individuals to cross party lines to help. And I think that's where the chamber plays a very vital role in this, because all of us, I don't care what district you have retail in your district. I don't care if you're Cortez, who only represents a few blocks, or you're like myself that operates a third of the state. You have retail in your district, and the chamber it has a voice with everybody. And so it has to be something that we take that the lawmakers in the state has to take a deep breath and say, to move forward with this, what's the best thing for our state, but actually what's the best thing for the small businesses that are the economic driver of our economy? Because whatever you do isn't going to hurt the big guys. It's just going to actually consolidate business to them, because it's going to run people out of business, going to draw them. But the small guys that control 70% of our economy, which is the small business owners, that's in Oklahoma, 50% of our economy nationwide. They employ the majority of the people, and they pay the largest amount of taxes. That's the people that we've got to be thinking that we could be interfering with and hurting and long range issues. And so while we know data privacy is something that's very important, we know that we have to solve this issue. And I know the states are getting frustrated because they're going at it themselves because the federal government is moving too slow. I will tell you, the new chairman of Energy and Commerce, which will be in place this time next year, this is her priority. And she's the chairman of Energy and Commerce, which has jurisdiction over it. And I really do believe, with the help of the chamber, getting involved in some of the Democrat districts, we'll have bipartisan support on this. We will have a piece of legislation next year. I think it's a very, very high possibility.
That's great. I think Jordan, give us some some of what the states are doing that's really concerning. That speaks to exactly what the congressman's talking about. What are some of the attributes that we really need to watch out for that either you've seen in the proposed Colorado version that we have, or what are some of the things that we can do? It sounds like we're going to need to hang on until help arrives, and it may be a bit, Congressman, is what I'm hearing from you. But help could come. But Jordan, give us an idea of the pitfalls.
Well, yeah, it's a very good question, and also, Congressman, thank you for your leadership on this and driving home the message that we need to get something done here. I think in terms of the states, I think one of the points that Representative Mullin brought up that's really key is making sure that small businesses are protected. And if you look at the California law, and a lot of these laws are saying, if you have the data of 50,000 or more people, then you're automatically captured by the law. Well, if you do the simple math there, that's the amount of people who can go into a restaurant on a single day. And that's a small independent restaurant. Or that's a food truck. If you get about 250 to 300 people to go through your food truck, so you're downtown Oklahoma City or in Tulsa. So that's something to be on the watch for. The other piece too, I think, is, as I mentioned earlier, so many of these bills have one or two tech companies in mind when they're being written. And there's not really a thought as to this is going to impact the entire economy. And this is going to impact retail. For example, I think one of the concerns we've seen in a lot of states is that these bills have anti-discrimination provisions against companies who discriminate against consumers who exercise their privacy rights. Well, one of the things that I don't think were really contemplated when laws like California were first drafted was you've got retail loyalty programs out there. If you've got your CVS card, or if you've got, you're a restaurant that has, points for your members, if someone says delete my data, how are you going to get them the discounts? And so that's also something that's at stake. A few other things to watch out for too. One of the things that's really holding things up in Washington, but we're seeing in other states pop up, is the use of private rights of action. And this is when it gives the ability for private lawsuits from individual citizens to sue companies for technical violations of the act that don't really even cause harm to the consumer. And it puts money in the trial bar's pockets, but it doesn't really help solve a lot of the problems at play, and actually creates more confusion, because then you start getting district to district interpretations of what the privacy law is, and you get away from uniformity. A couple other things that we've seen too are this concept known as global opt-out that I mentioned earlier. I think we've got some concerns about that, because if you enable a global opt-out, it basically tells all the websites that you go to stop using or collecting or sharing the data, which basically creates a de facto opt-in system. And an opt-in is a system that really is concerning for the entire business community, because it really cuts off data being used for a lot of beneficial purposes, like expanding access to credit, making sure that consumers, choices and consumers' preferences are taken into consideration for different advertising. And also, even things like public safety. Data is used in secondary ways that protected public safety. For example, the San Bernardino shooter in California was stopped from private sector data that was used with the public sector, brought together to find who those two shooters and stop them in their tracks. And so we want to make sure that any legislation out there isn't too overly aggressive in terms of opt-in, but strikes the right balance. Some things that are good, right to delete is fine, right to opt out of sharing is fine, right to know what kind of data is being used is fine. But you need to make sure you have some exceptions for societally beneficial uses of data, and strike that right balance with innovation and protection.
And Jordan, that's super helpful because I think when the data privacy debate in Oklahoma is really centers around, you said, you kind of mentioned it's written with a few companies in mind, and it's pretty clear that that's what they're talking about here is more social media driven. They're worried about Facebook having too much, information. But you really articulated how broad it cuts across. And it's not just about telecommunications companies or social media companies. It could be your local, Walgreens, and your fantastic perspective about how broad of an issue this is. And Congressman, one of the things you said was, we need some help from the chambers and others. What are the things that we can do to help raise awareness of this issue? Either with you or your colleagues. I'm assuming the Oklahoma delegation is in pretty good shape if you're on top of it. But what do we need chamber members and businesses around the country to do?
Well, yeah, our delegation, we're walking together, which we do on 99% of the issues. But what the chamber has to do is start engaging these states. The state chamber and the local chamber has to start engaging these states that have the most egregious data privacy rules coming out there, where they're actually trying to punish business owners. They're being unrealistic by what they're requiring, which is what Jordan was referring to on some of the stuff. It could be extremely devastating and harmful, and set up a tremendous amount of legal activity. And the person in Oklahoma didn't even know they were breaking or violating the law in Colorado. But you start looking at the way the legislators are lined up. I mean, you take some very liberal states, they're going to have some very liberal policies, and most liberal policies do not take in consideration of the business establishment. They think all businesses are evil, so they only look at it from the consumer perspective, and the consumer perspective is, everything's unfair to the consumer, and the business should be held 100% reliable regardless if they touched it or not. Well, that's why we need federal and not these independent states that are coming out with this legislation, because it's just going to cause confusion, and it's going to really mess up an opportunity for Oklahoma to gain revenue and tax revenue for outside states. Because what's going to happen is all the states then are just going to have to, and the retailers inside those states, unless you're set up for internet or for national or statewide, or not statewide, but international business, or just if you want to keep it inside the United States, unless you're set up that way, you're going to end up just having to have a disclaimer on all your websites. You're not allowed to sell to people outside the state. And that will happen. I mean, that's what's going to end up taking place. So, it's the chamber just has to be engaged. They have to be engaged. They have to go out, and they've got to set with the legislators. They've got to set with the governor. They got to set with the speaker. They got to set with a pro tem. They've got to go out and make sure that they're lobbying on the state level, plus on the congressional or the district level too. So they can't overlook that. This is something that's very, very important to the state chamber. If they want to take a lead on something, this could easily get out of control very fast. Because what happens is the more states that do it independently, it puts congressional members and be it the representatives or senators at odds with their own state then. Because if the state goes and passes it and the governor signs it, and then we're going to have a piece of federal legislation that's going to, no pun intended here, trump their policy, then it's going to put us back and forth. And what's going to happen is they're going to start wanting a piece of their state's legislation inside the federal legislation. And so then you're going to have this big mess too. And then the bill is going to get so big and have so many amendments on it that it's going to be difficult to even comply with that way. So we got to use the acronym KISS, keep it simple here. And I won't use the other S, keep it simple. And the way we do that is we just prevent this. We just make sure the states know we need federal, not state guidance here.
No doubt about it. We want to make sure we take some questions. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. And while you're doing that, kind of one other question I had for you, Congressman, is, You'd mentioned that the ranking member has, is making this a top issue and is working on it. So I'm sure you've got a general idea of some of the, parts of that bill. Are there any specific things that you'll be handling for her, or is it just a general idea of maybe what's in that bill that would be interesting?
Yeah, so we're using three principles here: transparency, accountability, and the balancing of privacy. And so to dig into those a little bit more on the transparency side, transparency is how the consumer data is collected and used. I mean, vitally important, right? We want to know how it's collected. We want to know how it's being used, and the consumer needs to know that. I think we have a lot of transparency issues with Facebook, with our social media sites, with Google. There's a lot of, no one knows. You can put all these, you can put all this disclaimer on there and no one reads, and they just put agree and then they go on through the site and they don't actually know how that data that's collected on is being used. So we got to have the transparency on that. Accountability for companies who need to protect the data. There has to be some type of standard out there. There has to be a minimum standard for companies that have data on individuals, that have payment information on individuals. They're keeping that information. They have to have a certain standard to be able to qualify. I hate more regulations, but we're to that point that they should be that the federal government should hit a minimum standard of what your data protection program has to be able to keep certain amount of information. What if you're going to use it, then what do you make sure you're hitting a minimum requirement? And number three, balancing the privacy concerns with the ability for small businesses to comply by the law. It can't be so complicated, which is what I was referring to a while ago, that the more states that do it, the more complicated the bill gets and the more difficult it gets for small businesses to comply. So we had to keep cost into consideration here. It has to have some type of balance. I know people are like, well, but the cost on the other end is great too. Well, it is. That's why there's got to be a balance between the two. We can't price it to the point and make it so complicated that the guy trying to go into business and open his retail store because he's got a unique clothing line or a unique furniture line, like downtown. I just go back to this, like downtown in the stockyards across from Cattleman's, we bought a kitchen table there. And the guy makes the furniture homemade. I mean, it's awesome. It's just wonderful the way he pours it. Of course, it took 6 months to get my kitchen table, but it was awesome. But a guy like that, well, he wouldn't be able to comply because he's not turning over a lot of items. He's turning over small ones because they're all custom built, all wood engraved and got unique stuff attached to them. That guy wouldn't be able to go in business anymore. And so you're going to have a lot more cookie cutter type businesses and retail businesses if you make it too expensive. So anyways, those are the three things: transparency, accountability, and balancing privacy.
So basically, if it keeps us from having to all have IKEA furniture, that would be a huge reason just to have the bill alone.
Hey, when I first went to college, I had milk crates as my furniture. I'm not joking when I say that.
That's right. Well, it sounds like maybe you had to use those while you've been waiting on your kitchen table.
Well, we had a kitchen table, it was just a little small.
Okay, you weren't without. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't without. Yeah.
Well, Scott, are there any other questions? Let me know. And I know one quick question I had for you, Jordan, is I know you have some Senate interest in this bill as well, or in this issue as well. And is that accurate? And then I think Senator Wicker is working on some legislation too. Anything different over there? Anything concerning, or are they, similar?
I think we're seeing, I think, basic trends between Republican bills and Democrat bills. I think that the ranking member's bill in the House has a lot of very good points in it to start from for consumer protection, and I think really gets to the concept of the need for a national standard. You go to the Senate side, Senator Wicker's bill also, I think, has a strong national standard in place, has some strong protections in place as well for consumers. But it doesn't get into providing for things like private rights of action. We believe, at the chamber too, that, both of these sets of Republican bills are getting it right in terms of putting that investigative and enforcement authority with the Federal Trade Commission. Although now I think we know we need to have some guardrails at the Federal Trade Commission as well too. And also giving state attorneys general the right to represent their states, but under one national standard. And but we're seeing some really good, I think, starting points for both sets of Republican bills. Senator Moran even had a bill too that I think is pretty good as well. We really haven't seen much in terms of Democratic proposals this go around in this session. And I think the congressman was right. We haven't really seen much from the majority yet in terms of new solutions for this session. The only real Democratic proposal I think may have some good legs to it is Representative Susan Delbenny's bill, which does provide a national standard, no private right of action, and also has an opt-in system for truly sensitive data. I think Wicker's bill is a very good start. Delbenny's bill is a good start. Catherine Morris Rogers' bill is a really good start as well. And I think if we find a mix of what's in those three, I think we'll get to a pretty good bill.
Great. Now we had one question that came into Scott. Scott, you want to go ahead and read that?
Yeah, it's from Alan White in the chat. He says, how do we ensure the extensive lobbying power of big tech firms isn't the guiding force on setting meeting privacy data regulation?
That's Alan, you're correct, because they have a very strong presence here. And I think that's another area that the chambers can be involved in. I mean, each one of the local chambers, I think the local chambers are some of the best to actually come up and meet. You have the state chamber, but the state chamber just kind of, if the state chamber is located in Oklahoma City, it's going to have more people representing from Oklahoma City. But if you have the local chambers that's coming up and making a push, I'm talking about a push where they're coming up every month and they're meeting with their representative, and they're meeting with their senators. That's where a lot of the lobbying is going to be through, because big tech can be here and they can have an arm, but your constituents coming in and talking to you, and they employ people in your district too. It's not one person that doesn't live in your district. These are people that's going to vote for you or not vote for you. Will make a huge, huge, huge difference. But it's got to be an organized effort from the federal chamber to the state chamber to the local chamber to be able to help them come in. Because even think about that, a lot of your small chambers can't afford to come up here once a month, or can't afford to come up here once a year for that matter. But you take my district, for example. How many different chambers do I have in my district? I honestly don't know, because there's a lot of towns. Brittany might know. I don't know how many chambers that Brittany, I just put her on the spot. I like that. There is a lot of chambers in just my district, so they could be rotating coming in. Of course, they don't have to come talk to me. I'm already there. But these areas that may be difficult, that's how you're going to get around the big tech's lobbying pressure. And you can completely silence them if you're up here enough, putting enough pressure on them.
Yeah, and I'll make a note about that too, in terms of, I lead a working group here at the U.S. Chamber. It's about 300 companies and trade associations that all care about getting a national privacy law done. The overwhelming majority of companies that I hear worried coming to me about this patchwork are companies in the life sciences industries, the agricultural industries, restaurants, retail. And it's because of that, we know we have to push for a bill that works for the entire economy and isn't just geared toward one sector. And I think that's really the important note to drive home, is that I think, as we've seen these bills proposed throughout the states, they have been geared toward one or two tech companies, but not realizing that this is going to hurt restaurants. This is going to hurt all different kinds of companies if we don't get this right. And my members are going to come complaining to me if we don't get a bill that works for the entire economy. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important. And I think the congressman strikes a very good point. Local chambers and state chambers are a powerful voice. One of the things that got the most noise recently here in DC for a national privacy bill is we actually got a letter together with 80 plus local and state chambers supporting a national privacy bill. And when you start hearing from local groups, that registers tremendously with folks on Capitol Hill.
Well, I think we know last year this legislation, I think it caught us a little bit by surprise in the sense of kind of the energy that it had. But you've given us a ton today to think about and really help arm us in terms of really trying to talk through legislators who have legitimate concerns. I mean, that's the thing. We don't want to, undermine the concerns that they're raising. It's just the tentacles. Yeah, the tentacles of this bill are just are too pretty overwhelming. Go ahead, Congressman.
And Chad, we keep talking about retail and businesses too, but you got to think about the hospitals too and the compliancy that they have to have. I mean, they already have a lot of compliancies, right? But you have a lot of rural hospitals that are right on the cuff of leaving our community, which a lot of times they're the largest employer. One more heavy cost, burdensome cost, could be the straw that broke the camel's back. And there's a lot of data privacy that's there too, that they got to operate with. Now, we're not talking about HIPAA. We're talking about other stuff. They got bills that's got to be collected. They also most of the time have a cafeteria in the place. They may have a little flower shop to the side. So you got to think about all these things that people aren't even thinking about too, that's going to be damaged if we have a patchwork of individuals or a bill that's too cumbersome for people to comply with.
All right. Any final thoughts from either of you all? Really appreciate your time. And this has been super helpful. I hope our team has been taking some copious notes because we've got some great talking points as we're talking to local legislators about this session. But any final thoughts?
I would
want you to spell.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to tell him, I want you to spell copious. If you're going to use that term,
no chance. No.
Go ahead, Jordan. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Call. What is that? Do you use a lifeline? I'm going to use a lifeline to Emily Crouch. Copious, please.
Well, I think I would note this. These state privacy bills come with a cost. California's cost is $55 billion, according to their own agent. The Florida bill that's being proposed is estimated to cost $27 billion. That's a lot of cost just for those states. But imagine what you're going to have if you're going to have to comply across state lines with different rules. And let me give you an example. I'll tell you this. If I'm late and I'm taking an Uber I live in Virginia, and if I'm taking an Uber to a Washington football game, if I want to be on my phone and look at the score on the way there to see the Redskins or the new team name is losing, then I have 3 potential data laws that I'm going to have in that 35 to 40 minute Uber ride just to get to the stadium. And I don't know how, especially if you're a small business dealing with consumers in such an area like that, how you're going to survive. And that's just one of the key reasons why we need a national bill. And we need something that makes sense so that if you're living on one side of the border of a state doing business in another, you got one set of rules and not multiple.
I agree. I'm with him.
You all, thanks so much for your time. This is really fantastic, and agree that we need to get engaged, and our members that are on, I know, care about this issue, and we got a lot of work to do to articulate everything that was said here today. So thank you both very much. Stay warm if you're in Oklahoma, and Congressman, stay safe in DC. Jordan, appreciate you being here.
Thank you.